Hey there, welcome to the Soil and Roots podcast, journeying together into deep discipleship. I'm Brian Fisher. This is episode 122, a riddle wrapped in a mystery. This is entirely off topic, but a few hours ago I got my hair cut at the local barber shop, and as I was sitting there talking to the nice lady who was cutting my hair, I was observing all of my hair clippings falling down on the little coat that they put on you, and I was shocked at just how many of them were gray. I guess this has been going on for some time, but mentally I feel like I'm somewhere around 15 or 18 years old, but apparently the rest of me doesn't agree. Anyway, I was becoming very conscious of my mortality just a few hours ago, so I guess that's the state of mind I'm in as we get started today. Back on topic. I suppose I should throw out a reminder that I haven't shared with you in a while, and that is if you're new to the Soil and Roots journey, if for some reason this is your first episode, first of all, welcome. Thanks for tuning in and checking it out. But we do always recommend that anybody new to the podcast actually starts back at the beginning. Now you might be saying, my gosh, it's 121 episodes ago, and I get it, but just to serve you well, each episode and each season builds on the previous one. So way back in season 1, we sort of laid out the problem that we're here to solve together. And that's what we refer to as the Great Omission. Then in seasons 2 to 4, we laid out what I call the 3 primary problems: the discipleship dilemma, the formation gap, and the forgotten kingdom. These are challenges specific to our age and primarily in the West that make our discipleship journey, our spiritual formation, that much more challenging. Then in season 5, we added some really wonderful color and flavor to seasons 1 through 4 with some awesome conversations with experts in various areas related to soil and roots. So, we've covered quite a bit of ground here over the last coming up on 3 years. Anywho, if you're just starting your soil and roots journey and jumping in right here, we might be using some terminology or referring to some history that just isn't all that familiar to you. So the podcast is evergreen. We're not discussing current events, and we rarely refer to anything that's time sensitive. So that allows you to start from episode 1 and just move ahead at your own pace as you see fit. That being said, if you're a rebel and you just want to start with us right here today, you're welcome. It's good to have you with us. And let's plow ahead. We are waist deep in season 6, and it's dedicated to exploring a vital question. If discipleship is about us becoming more like Jesus, if that's the point, and we do that over time, being formed more like him, what does that actually mean? Who is the object of our formation? If we're to think and act and relate and love more like Jesus, it seems essential to try to get a grasp of who he is. So exploring the object of our formation requires some depth. Now, a surface-level approach might result in us imitating behaviors without real change. We may gain some head knowledge that never really reaches the heart. It's tempting to dwell on aspects of Jesus that are often taught and seemingly straightforward, like the fruits of the Spirit. That's great. But sometimes that results in us neglecting some of the more, frankly, confusing and vexing parts of who Jesus is. Well, not so here at Soil and Roots, because we like to delve deep, and that's what we're doing, digging into the deeper parts of the human person. So we spend quite a bit of time talking about our hidden and unconscious ideas, these conclusions, these principles that drive us normally from behind the scenes. We've explored our unspoken desires, the thing for which we truly yearn. We've discussed being more awake, more attuned to God and others and ourselves and creation and culture. Remember, we're placed in 4 relationships here on the planet. And becoming more attuned to those things is what we refer to as deep discipleship, or becoming a person of depth. And we also examine the role of God's grand narrative, his story, but we also look at our stories in our ongoing quest to become the type of people that God desires us to be. So if genuine discipleship means being transformed from the inside out, this often involves some very mysterious things about being human, and obviously some mysterious things about God, and they're all, frankly, worth exploring. As we become more like Jesus, it's our inner lives that we're concerned with. That's what we're looking to be transformed. This means that we're becoming the best versions of ourselves from our hearts outward. We're We're not becoming clones. We don't lose our uniqueness. Matter of fact, it's just the opposite. We become increasingly who God has intended us to be. We are being conformed to the image of his Son, and at the same time, we begin to experience what he promises, the abundant life, this mysterious peace that passes all understanding, and the sense of being content regardless of our circumstances. So today is a really fascinating episode because we're going to explore yet another characteristic of Jesus that probably doesn't get a whole lot of press: his enigmatic nature. It's a big word. His recurring tendency to be confusing, mysterious, cryptic, and sometimes even vexing. Now, if you ask most people to name the characteristics of Jesus, there probably aren't too many who would respond with, "Oh, he's puzzling and confusing." Gentle? Sure. Loving and caring? Hope so. But cryptic? Whoever said something along the lines of, "Be like Jesus, be confusing." Yet, if we explore what seems confusing about Jesus, we may experience more of the truth behind the mystery. We might discover that Jesus is a person of extraordinary depth, and that depth can often seem confusing. However, you and I, should aspire to become individuals of that same kind of depth. You may have heard of William Wilberforce, one of my all-time favorite characters from history. He's a British politician who was the pivotal leader in the 19th century abolition of the British slave trade. His son, Samuel Wilberforce, was a bishop and is regarded as one of the greatest orators and debaters of his era. In fact, he participated in what's been called the Great Debate over Darwin's evolutionary theory at Oxford in 1860. After Wilberforce died in 1873, a riddle was found among his papers, and it goes like this. Quote, "I am the sweetest of sounds an orchestra heard, yet an orchestra never was seen. I'm a bird of gay plumage, yet less like a bird, nothing ever in nature was seen. Touch the earth, I expire. In water, I die. In air, I lose breath, yet can swim and can fly. Darkness destroys me and light is my death, and I only keep going by holding my breath. If my name can't be guessed by a boy or a man, by a woman or girl, it certainly can." End quote. That's the riddle. Can you figure out the answer? Well, if you can, you probably should win some sort of prize, because in the 152 years since it was found, nobody has ever solved it with any certainty. To this day, it's an enigma what exactly Samuel Wilberforce was thinking, although there have been some pretty good guesses. Feel free to send one in if you have one. One I saw recently was a rainbow. Not entirely sure how that fits, but somebody thought it was a pretty good guess. Anyway, Jesus sometimes spoke in riddles. He had his finger on the pulse of his culture, so he often used stories and illustrations that would have spoken to the people of his day, but even they were sometimes confused by his stories and his examples. Here at Soil and Roots, we talk a lot about this concept we call ideas in the air, which are the accepted principles and cultural assumptions of the time and place in which we're born. We typically internalize them unconsciously. We just function because they're all around us. They are simply the air that we breathe. In the 21st century Western world, post-Enlightenment, we live in idea set, ideas of the air, that promotes rationality and science as the primary sources of truth, with an emphasis on knowledge and intellectualism. Whatever the situation, we expect there to be a correct answer. Yet, Jesus didn't always correct everyone. If we are imitating Christ by leaning into relationships with him and others, then accuracy is part of that, but it may not be the whole story. Being more like Christ means we are empathetic, patient, wise, compassionate, even while we consider error in ourselves and others. When we look at Jesus, we don't always see him acting like the sin police, or even the doctrine police for that matter. Doesn't run around correcting everyone's theological errors. Instead, he invites others to experience the truth through his teaching and his life, without always telling the apostles and the crowds and other people that he meets that they're just wrong. Sometimes he does, but not always. He seems to be a master of meeting people where they are and relating to them in that moment, something I suspect we all could learn from. Overall, he seemed to be incredibly patient with most people, allowing them time to reach out to him, recognizing that experiencing truth is often a process. Here in the West, we prioritize intellect, science, reasoning, but the fact is the brain can be right and the heart can be somewhere else. Just look at the Pharisees. They knew the scriptures backward and forward, but many of them weren't following Jesus. It's more comfortable to be around people who agree with us, people who think we're right and accurate because we're on the same page. That's certainly where I'm most comfortable. But that's not really what Jesus did. He intentionally sought out people who had very different sets of ideas from himself. Samaritans, Zionists, Pharisees, Gentiles, and many others with radically different notions. So sometimes he spoke to them in parables, in riddles, and stories. Sometimes he refused to answer a question, and very often, when he did answer the question, his answers didn't really seem to address the original question in the first place. He employed various methods and experiences to capture hearts and to sow seeds that probably would take some time to grow, rather than merely trying to persuade people to agree mentally in that moment. He continues to plant and cultivate such seeds right now, thousands of years later. Part of the reason Jesus' teachings can be so confusing and mysterious for us is that he employed an ancient tradition regarding wisdom that tends to be pretty different from the modern Western mindset. The modern quest to be correct can lead to a black and white view of the world, and when we look at the Bible through that same lens, we might unconsciously have the idea that is simply just an instruction manual. It's a guidebook with advice to be directly applied in every situation. That seems to be why every modern sermon must end with some sort of application. If we aren't told what to do, we might find ourselves disappointed. A similar view in modern Christianity might be called the Nike approach. God said it, just do it. The idea seems to be that since God said to, for example, stop sinning, we should just stop sinning. This is a very Western intellectual perspective, that we can make a decision rationally and then our behavior will automatically follow. But human hearts are not quite that simple. Ask anyone who has been addicted to anything. We know addiction is harmful. We know what we are doing is wrong. We just can't stop the behavior. Those in the Bible times operated from and lived in, quite frankly, a pretty different set of ideas in the air. Although the Bible does offer a wealth of guidance for life, its original audience would probably not have resonated with the concept that they could take whatever passage they wanted to from Scripture and apply it directly in whatever situation was happening at that moment in some sort of one-for-one application. Let's take Proverbs, for example. The editors of Holman's Apologetic Study Bible write this, quote, "The types of saying found in Proverbs reflect a way of thinking and teaching that has been largely abandoned in modern Western culture. Proverbs are general statements of truth rather than invariable promises or laws." They go on. "The student of wisdom is challenged by the ambiguity to explore the possibilities for understanding the proverb along with the variety of situations in which the principle appropriately applies. The ambiguity also promotes ongoing reflection as to the legitimate limits for applying the principle." End quote. The Proverbs can't possibly consist entirely of direct instruction, meant to be taken literally and applied universally, although, let's be honest, that's the way the Bible is often taught. Otherwise, what do we do with a verse like Proverbs 26, 4 and 5? Quote, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, and he will be wise in his own eyes." End quote. Well, which is it? Are we supposed to answer the fool or not? Wisdom often lives in the ambiguity, in understanding the context of the situation in which the principle applies, and then learning its limits. But let's strap in, because this method is often confusing for those of us brought up in the post-Enlightenment ideas in which we find ourselves today. So way back in Proverbs 1, the author lays out the purpose for his book. "Let a wise person listen and increase learning, and let a discerning person obtain guidance. For understanding a proverb or a parable, the words of the wise and their riddles." the words of the wise and their riddles. This is an apt description of Jesus and how he often shared his teachings and his life. In fact, the word here translated as parable can also be translated as enigma. Jesus often taught through parables, meaning he frequently conveyed messages through enigmas, puzzles, conundrums, and this can be a little bit uncomfortable for those of us raised with Western ideas. So, what do we do with that? Well, three things. We might first embrace the idea that the straightforward black and white cause and effect ideas we're used to may not actually be the best way for our hearts to grow and deepen. Simply being fed information may lead to intellectual agreement, but not to heart transformation. Because sometimes our hearts need to wrestle, struggle, and be shaken in order to deepen. Though a bit uncomfortable, we might embrace the idea that Jesus' enigmas are intentionally confusing as a way for God to draw us in, beckoning us deeper. An enigma is inherently an invitation. It's not a refusal. It's not an objection. It invites. It says, if you can, unravel me. It's not a wall that's blocking us. It's the sword and the stone testing us. It invites our hearts to do more than simply accept the fact. It invites us to explore, to experience. Now, there's a challenge with this, and that is because the concept can easily devolve into a concentration of power among some sort of religious elite. It's the very issue that Martin Luther and others resisted. They fought against the idea that only a select few of worthy people are worthy of hearing from God, so that they should read and interpret Scripture for the rest of us, that only a few people can unravel these enigmas. Even today, most of the cases of spiritual abuse that I come across involve this same sort of corrupted ideas. Some Christian leader claims he or she has a special word from the Lord or some sort of revelation or some particular authority because they have the so-called ability to interpret Scripture in a way that the rest of us simply can't. Well, that's not what you and I are talking about here today. Instead, difficult or mysterious passages invite us all to explore and to dig in and to wrestle with and marinate in their depths. But not everyone in Christ's day, just like ours, is willing or ready to accept complicated stories or marinate in those truths. That's why Jesus repeatedly said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Not everyone has listening ears. Not everyone's ready to wrestle and explore and experience. Yet, the good news is, even so, Jesus doesn't tend to leave us where we are. There's a sense of Christ slowly, persistently, and patiently drawing us into deeper waters. He didn't start by tossing Peter out of the boat the first time they met. Instead, he gradually molded Peter's character until Peter stepped out of the boat all by himself. The truth is, not one shining pearl popped out of an oyster. It slowly, beautifully, and lovingly uncovered one layer after another. Well, not only is an enigma an invitation, but it's also a challenge in the very best way. So imagine a father who challenges his children or allows them to challenge him. Imagine them wrestling on the floor, racing against each other, attempting to dunk one another in the pool. Even from a very young age, my two sons were always eager to try to topple me in the pool, and they're now in their 20s, and I think for the most part they still can't do it. Competition can be healthy. It helps to build us. It helps to mold us. Sons and daughters are invited to test their strength against their parents to see how much they've grown and to prove their mettle. This kind of challenge is also a way to build relationships. Through it, kids can rest in the security of their father's strength, but also engage with him. It's a way for the child to say, "Look what I can do, Dad," and for the father to say, "Come on, show me." Another way for the father to delight in his children and participate in their lives. Have you ever wondered if God might be intentionally mysterious at times as a way to challenge us to come closer? The only way we solve the mysteries, or at least come to be at peace with not solving them, is to press closer into God. We don't uncover the truth without moving closer to the source of truth. You can't see better by moving farther away from the light. This is part of seeking and finding. Christ knew his followers would come closer to him the more they engaged with the messy, complicated, and sometimes baffling messages at the heart of his ministry. Unlike our standard model of the 21st century West, which focuses on acquiring information, Jesus was once again prioritizing relationships over mere head knowledge. Our culture employs an educational model based on regurgitating information, but perhaps becoming more like Jesus means we emphasize less on knowing and more on being. And let's be upfront, sometimes our being is formed through challenges. Okay, so enigmas offer invitation, enigmas offer challenges, and it also offers transformation. When solved, enigmas present a moment of epiphany, a burst of insight, satisfaction as the answer is revealed. That guides us into a clearer experience of truth, and truth typically transforms if we're open to it. We've all experienced the joy and satisfaction of solving a problem or putting a jigsaw puzzle together. It can be transformative. Sometimes, though, we need a key. During a radio broadcast on October 1st, 1939, Winston Churchill was discussing the Nazi-Soviet pact shortly after World War II began. Churchill described the actions of Russia as, quote, a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, end quote. But then he added, perhaps there is a key. In our case, sometimes the key to understanding Christ's baffling teachings is to consider them in their context, to get ourselves out of our idea sets and to put ourselves into the idea sets of the original audiences. You may be aware that there has been a slew of scholars and theologians, matter of fact, a movement in the last 50 years or so in scholastic theology to better understand the audiences for whom the Bible was originally written. As it's been said many times, the Bible wasn't written to us, but it was written for us. Sometimes a key, or at least a partial key, to understanding Jesus' enigmas and difficult teachings is to immerse ourselves in the culture, in the idea sets, and in the circumstances of the Bible's original audiences. Thanks to modern archaeology and technology, we have more opportunities than any previous generation to do just that. As an example, there's a growing, now worldwide nonprofit called the Bible Project. It's based in Portland. That helps us better understand the context of the Bible and its original audiences through creative videos and lessons. So perhaps there are some keys there for us to help us unlock some of the more difficult things we hear from Jesus as we put ourselves in the idea sets and the cultures of those original audiences. And sometimes, to be fair, we are transformed by accepting that there are some mysteries we won't unravel and some truths that Jesus shared that may take years or maybe even decades to fully embrace. Again, we can find some rest in the fact that Jesus meets us where we are right now. Okay, to this point, we've been discussing Jesus' teachings in public words, but Jesus could also be enigmatic in his actions and his approaches to individuals, in relationships, and even some of those examples can be a bit confusing for us today. Jesus really didn't seem to care too much about what people thought of him, and sometimes this meant he acted very much against prevailing assumptions and how people should behave. Honestly, at times he acted counter to contemporary assumptions about how Christians should behave. Can you imagine how a Christian might get into trouble today if he called someone a dog? Can you envision standing before a crowd of followers and proclaiming to someone from an entirely different religion that you had never witnessed faith like theirs? Or if you openly discussed eating someone's body and drinking their blood? That sounds a bit bizarre. Some of these moments contradict the ideas of Jesus that tend to float around modern Christianity, that he was always meek and sweet and always considerate of everybody. The Sunday school Jesus wouldn't do those types of things. The problem is the historical Jesus did with some regularity. So let's talk about one of my favorite stories, the Syro-Phoenician woman. She was a Gentile with a demon-possessed daughter who cried out to Jesus for help because her daughter was suffering terribly. As a Canaanite, the Jews considered her and her people as cultural outcasts, as infidels, too lowly to associate with. The disciples were annoyed by her cries for help and urged Jesus just to get rid of her. But Jesus finally answers the desperate woman, and what does he say? I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel, meaning I didn't come for you. Undeterred, she kneels before him and cries out for help again. And Jesus responds, it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Not sure about you, but that sounds a bit like a racial insult. But the Gentile woman is persistent. She tells Jesus, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. To which Jesus replies, woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted. And her daughter was healed. Well, I imagine the 12 disciples had to pick their jaws off of the ground after he said that. How much courage must it have taken for this Gentile woman to approach a Jewish leader and his followers and to keep crying for help until she got his attention, and in fact, until he said yes? And then he reminds her of her place in society, how the Jews of her day saw her as a dog. Well, it was an invitation to the woman, a challenge. Here is the puzzle. Here is the conundrum. Here are the circumstances. You're a Gentile woman. Your daughter's only hope lies in the hands of a teacher whose people see you as a little better than an animal. What do you do? In her case, you press in. Keep crying out. You don't let anyone or anything keep you from the hope you see before you. One more story that captures this really well is one that I'm sure vexed those around Jesus. In Capernaum, a Roman centurion approaches Jesus and alerts him that the centurion's servant is paralyzed, and Jesus asks if he should come and heal the servant. And this Roman centurion replies, "Lord, I don't deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed." Jesus is amazed, and he says to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith." Then Jesus says to the Roman, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." Now, it's important here for us to keep in mind that the Romans were polytheistic. They worshiped many gods, such as Jupiter, the patron god of Rome, and Mars, the god of war. They also revered their emperors as divine. So, worshiping many gods is pretty darn contrary to what the Israelites had been taught, that which constituted proper faith. So here comes this Roman centurion. Not only is he in many ways an enemy of the Jews, their oppressor, but he's likely a pagan. Does Jesus send him away, rebuke him, share with him the 4 spiritual laws, give him a lecture on polytheism and monotheism? He doesn't. He meets the Roman where he's at. Jesus tells him in front of a crowd that he has not seen anyone in Israel with this man's faith. This is a pretty enigmatic exchange. What do you think any listening Jew would have thought of that? What do you think the disciples thought about that? They might think, whoa, here I am, a devout Jewish man, and I gave up my livelihood to follow Christ, and here's this pagan Roman, and the Messiah says he's never seen such faith in Israel before? This pagan has more faith than me? It's a shocking claim. It's a vexing story. As with the Gentile woman, we see Jesus more interested in relationships than in immediate doctrinal accuracy. We see him engaging with people in a unique way that carefully considers the specifics of their lives. Jesus' actions and reactions are not one size fits all. There's no formula that we can memorize and apply. Jesus is a person of depth, and he slowly and carefully invites us into those depths with him. Well, people in Jesus' day often misunderstood his words and his actions and his relationships, and we're still misunderstanding him today. They misread the situation, they misconstrued his message, they missed the point, and as I just said, we can tend to do the same. Writing for the Bible Engagement Project, Chase Replogle states this: Jesus often used misunderstanding and confusion as a means of drawing out deeper questions and pressing conversations beyond the normal conventions. The misunderstandings were often his point. We should also keep ourselves from growing frustrated by difficult passages and hard sayings and things that at first pass don't make sense. We, too, should press on. Well, this all might prompt some questions in us as we close up today. If we are to become like Jesus, how can we show the depth of relational wisdom that he displays? How can we prioritize relationships while still holding to the truth? How can we see the enigmas of God not just as problems to be solved, but as opportunities to press closer? How about the enigmas of other people? How about the enigmas of ourselves? And if we're becoming more like Jesus, does that mean there should be times where we don't give the right answer? When we hide or obscure the truth, or when we simply walk away for the time? Times when we must use incredible discernment to treat people as highly unique individuals and honor where they are in their current set of circumstances and not force them to move quicker than they're ready to move? What would it mean to become somebody of that sort of spiritual and relational and emotional depth? Well, we'll be talking a lot more about just that, how we live out being enigmatic, in our next episode. It's going to be a greenhouse episode, and I'll be rejoined, as always, with Doc and Handsome Kyle. Thanks so much for being with me today. I appreciate it. If you want more information on Soil and Roots, you can go to our website at soilandroots.org. If you're in social media and you'd like to follow us there, you can check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Soil and Roots Podcast, Soil and Roots Podcast. You can also find us on Substack, along with a large community there, and on YouTube, and those handles are just Soil and Roots. If you'd like to financially support the work of Soil and Roots as we seek to help cultivate deep disciples around the world, you can give safely and securely at the website at soilandroots.org. Today's episode was written by Dr. Tim Boswell, and I edited it, and Zach Fisher produced it. He also provides our music, and you can check out his lo-fi channel on Spotify at FishU. Thanks again for being with me today, and we'll see you next time.